I recently looked at weak forms, so now I want to turn to the related topic of contractions, like its, won't and theirs. In this video, I'll explain what they are, when they're used, what distinguishes it's not from it isn't, and why avoiding contractions sounds not just non-native, but non-human. I'll focus here on contractions that are commonly used in various styles of both speaking and writing. And the most common contractions are very common indeed. The British National Corpus of Speech contains 10 million words, and more than 1 in 20 is a contraction. In conversation, contractions are all over the place, across accents and age groups.
I knew I didn't look anything like her. I knew I'd never... That's a problem with playing a real-life character. You'll never be perfect.
And if you play someone who's well-known, it's even worse.
I'm sort of known for creating these very extreme characters. Maybe I've tried too hard in the past.
It's a dialogue.
It's like there's a mirror right there.
Yeah.
And you're staring at yourself and you can't look away, and it's the scariest thing in the world.
You're doing comedy and it's just silence. And you're just dying inside going like, there's no way that this is working.
They just do what they're told. It's nothing to do with that.
No. An actor can't or won't do what they want them to do, or it's sunny and he doesn't want it sunny, but he's got to shoot anyway.
Women starring in movies, they're making money. You think this is a trend that's here to stay?
That conversation illustrates how its is by far the most common contraction in English, followed by that's. Theirs is also very common, as are your, we're, their. And can't is far more common in native speech than cannot. So what are contractions? They mostly involve a reduced word joined to the end of the preceding word. Most involve verbs, specifically auxiliary or aux verbs. And in most of them, a syllable is lost, indicated in writing by an apostrophe. There are two main kinds of contractions. In the negative kind, the word not loses its full vowel and goes on the end of an aux verb. These are the most common. I'm including to be and the so-called modal verbs in the aux group. In the other kind of contraction, it's the aux verb itself that contracts and goes on the preceding word, often a pronoun. These are the most common. I'll call these contractions aux contractions. There are numerous differences between the two kinds. The neg contractions are stressed, but the aux ones are usually unstressed. I've started, but I haven't finished. Another difference is that the aux contractions have just one syllable, but nt is still a syllable in its own right after d, z, v and t. So didn't, isn't, haven't, mightn't. A third difference is their history. Aux contractions have been around longer. Shakespeare's full of them, like all's well that ends well.
All the world's a stage.
The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king.
Shakespeare also had some contractions we don't use anymore, especially contracting the pronoun it. Nowadays, we contract it is to its, but Shakespeare preferred tis.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
We still have one popular pronoun contraction, let us becoming let's. Something that causes confusion is that the aux contractions can be used with the word not. So we end up with two ways to express a negative idea. It isn't or it's not. You aren't or you're not. They haven't or they've not, etc. The difference is less about meaning than frequency. Natives tend to use contracted is and are more than isn't and aren't. With the other verbs, it's the reverse. Natives prefer haven't, hadn't, wouldn't, won't. I won't do it is far more common than I'll not do it. Of course, the words isn't and aren't are still very important. They're heavily used in questions. So, although the statement it's not is rather more common than it isn't,
it's got all the use you want.
Isn't is still used very much in questions.
Is it
So where don't we use contractions? The aux contractions are avoided when the following idea has been taken away. Would I like some coffee? Yes, I'd like some. But if we take away like some, it has to be yes, I would. Likewise, we can ask you're where? But if where is moved away, it has to be tell me where you are.
You can only ever be, if you're lucky, 65% of what they are.
And of course, uncontracted forms can also be used to be emphatic.
They are perfect.
Now, what about style? Aren't contractions very informal? Not in contemporary speech. They're less common in formal, scripted speeches. But even the Queen uses them sometimes.
I don't know that anyone had invented the term platinum for a 70th wedding anniversary when I was born. You won't expect it to be around that long. Even Prince Philip has decided it's time to slow down a little.
And we get more of them from the younger royals.
Wouldn't it be better, though, if the demand for Rhino Horn dropped to the extent that they didn't need anyone to protect them at all? That's what we're here to talk about today.
Going back to Churchill, his speeches contained very few contractions.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, and if, which I do not for a moment believe.
But today, even a serious prime ministerial address contains plenty of them.
We are strengthening our amazing NHS, we're pioneering work on a vaccine, and we will beat it. And we'll stop all social events who do not live in your home. If you don't follow the rules, it is still true, so it's vital. That is the way. That's all.
Writing definitely has fewer contractions, but the common ones are only forbidden when the style is cold and impersonal, as in academic journals. To address readers more personally, contractions have long been used.
Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail.
And here are some contractions in posters from the First World War over a century ago. The US government, citing research, says write like you talk is a common rule of writing readably, and the best way to do that is to use contractions. The advice for the British government website is to avoid neg contractions like can't and don't. But it's easy to find the website contradicting its own advice. Once you've asked for legal advice, the police can't question you. Here's another apparent discrepancy in a recent issue of the Economist magazine, where the cover has "and what's wrong with it," but the article inside has "and what is wrong with it." For an explanation, I turned to Lane Greene, who's the language columnist and an editor at The Economist. So, Lane, what can you tell us about this difference?
Well, the style guide of The Economist, which tells you to not overdo contractions, to use them quite lightly, mostly applies to the writing that you'll find in the pages of The Economist, which is to say in the columns of text that make up the bulk of the magazine itself. But on the cover, we give ourselves a lot more leeway for a wittier and warmer style that gets people to buy The Economist off the shelf. But once they're reading the actual Economist, we do shift into a slightly different mode where we're a little more analytical and we want to kind of convince. We aim to be a little classic and a little conservative.
Do you yourself have any advice that you would give to non-native users of English?
The use of contractions is one of those things that really mark the comfortable fluent speaker out from the sort of slightly more practiced but labored newer speaker. And learners shouldn't try to be too slangy or informal, but contractions are not one of those cases. They're so universal that they're perfectly usable, even in quite formal situations.
Thank you very much, Lane. Of course, one type of English that uses contractions less is non-native English. After all, contractions are less common in writing, and language teaching often prioritises writing. This foreignness of uncontracted speech is something native speakers can sometimes be aware of.
You cannot buck the system, Tony.
If you stop forcing things, they will come to you.
How long have you been in this country?
Why?
Wait, you never heard of gypsy cabs? You don't use contractions? Assimilate already.
What are contraptions?
Never mind.
And because contractions are avoided in cold, unemotional English, they're often avoided by robots and aliens.
That is correct, sir. If you do not speak English, I am at your disposal with 187 other languages.
It is agreed. We will cooperate until they are no further use to us.
In Star Trek, the android character Data failed to be human because he had no sense of humour and no contractions.
Haven't you noticed how easily I handle human speech? I use their contractions. For example, I say can't or isn't, and you say cannot and is not. Quite true. I keep trying to be more human and keep failing.
Star Trek fans have pointed out that Data does use contractions repeatedly, showing that the writers were inconsistent. But it seems to be the Orc's contractions that he uses so readily.
I've always felt that it was done hurriedly.
If another character catches him using a neg contraction, it probably means something very suspicious is going on.
I'm experiencing subspace interference, which limits my abilities. I can't operate as quickly as...
What did you say?
I said I cannot operate...
No, that's not what you said. You said I can't. You used a contraction, didn't you?
Summing up contemporary native use of the contractions we've been looking at here, the relevant question is perhaps not whether the context is casual enough to allow contractions, but rather whether the context is formal enough and cold enough to avoid them. I don't think that many natives would even notice if they saw it's and don't in a piece of formal writing, or if Microsoft Excel were to say that it can't find the data you're looking for rather than cannot. But on the other hand, just ask a native speaker what their reaction would be if they came across "because you are worth it," or "I cannot believe it is not butter."
That's all.